Human beings managed to rule the planet largely thanks to our sharp, clear minds. But over millions of years of evolution, nature placed a biological lock on us. As long as you are awake, your brain constantly builds up a neurotransmitter called adenosine. It works like a ticking hourglass. As time passes, it binds to receptors in your brain, and when that buildup hits a critical point, your brain signals your body that it is time to sleep. However, during its own evolutionary journey, the coffee tree came up with a defensive chemical designed to poison insects' caffeine. Looking at plant biochemistry data from the FAO, the molecular shape of caffeine looks almost identical to human adenosine. When this liquid enters your bloodstream and rushes to your brain, it pulls off an incredibly elegant biochemical hijack. Caffeine gets there first and steps right into those adenosine receptors. It takes up the space without actually triggering the sleep signal. Think of it like sliding a broken dummy key into a lock. The lock doesn't open, but the real key can't get in either. Your brain is forced to stay in a highly alert state, pumping dopamine and adrenaline. We think we have magically gained extra energy, but in reality, we are just borrowing tomorrow's alertness ahead of time. This aggressive rewrite of our brain's internal wiring is what made humans hooked, transforming this dark liquid into the ultimate fuel for global politics. Before the 17th century, coffee was a fiercely guarded state secret in the Islamic world. Sufi monks relied on it to stay awake for late-night prayers, and imperial armies used it to maintain morale during exhausting long-distance campaigns. Back then, raw coffee beans were strictly banned from crossing the border to prevent Europeans from planting their own crops. But in 1683, history hit a dramatic turning point. That year, the Ottoman Empire gathered a massive army of 150,000 men to lay siege to Vienna, the gateway to Europe. After months of a bloody standoff, European relief forces arrived, defeating the Turkish army and sending them into a frantic retreat. Among the mountains of abandoned gear on the battlefield, victorious Christian soldiers found hundreds of strange sacks filled with odd, dark beans that smelled like burnt wood. The European soldiers had never seen anything like it, assuming it was just worthless camel feed left behind by the enemy. They were ready to burn the whole lot. That was when a Polish spy named Jerzy Kulczycki stepped in. He had spent years trading in the Ottoman Empire and spoke the language fluently. Recognizing the true value of the beans, he asked the king for the abandoned feed. Kulczycki opened one of Vienna's very first coffee houses. To help Europeans handle the bitter, burnt taste, he made a simple change that would rewrite culinary history. He filtered out the grounds and added a generous amount of milk and honey. This spontaneous tweak didn't just lay the groundwork for Vienna's famous coffee culture. It eventually evolved into the early blueprint for the cappuccino. The armies marched away, and the smoke of empire cleared, but the dark liquid had already quietly crossed the border into Europe. Once coffee firmly established its footprint in Europe, it triggered a quiet but profound cleanup of the social hierarchy. Before its arrival, crowded European cities suffered from heavily polluted water supplies. As a result, almost everyone, from wealthy nobles to poor laborers, drank low-alcohol beer or cheap wine instead of water all day long. This meant that for centuries society lived in a constant, groggy, slightly blurred state of mind. Coffee changed everything. For the first time in human history, it offered a public space where people could gather while remaining completely sober and rational. In 17th and 18th century London, these coffee houses entered a golden age, earning the nickname penny universities. For the price of a single copper coin, anyone could buy a dish of coffee and stay all day. Inside, class barriers completely vanished. Merchants and philosophers shared the same tables, reading the latest pamphlets and relentlessly picking apart government decisions. This unprecedented gathering of sharp minds deeply terrified rulers on both sides of the English Channel. In 1675, King Charles II became so panicked by the political organizing happening inside these shops that he issued a harsh royal decree banning all coffee houses across the country. claiming they were breeding grounds for rebellion and illegal rumors against the crown. Meanwhile, across the water in Paris, Café Procope became a magnet for thinkers like Voltaire, Rousseau, and Diderot. Fueled by the mental sharpness of caffeine, they mapped out the core logic of the Encyclopedia and the Enlightenment, effectively planting the intellectual explosives for the French Revolution. Even though the royal ban in London lasted only 11 days before public outrage forced the king to back down, it proved a powerful point. A simple dark liquid capable of forcing the human brain awake had gained the political weight to shake empires and rewrite the course of civilization. From that point on, human history was completely reformatted by a tiny coffee bean. While coffee hits the human nervous system like a sudden jolt of electricity, tea plays a completely different psychological game. For thousands of years, civilizations noticed that drinking tea didn't just wake them up. It made them remarkably focused and composed. The secret behind this state of mind is a unique tag team of natural chemicals. Tea does contain caffeine, but it is paired with a rare amino acid called L-theanine. When you drink a cup of tea, these two compounds work together to alter your brain chemistry in a highly specific way. While caffeine tries to accelerate your thoughts, L-theanine steps in to smooth out the rough edges. It relaxes the mind without causing drowsiness by encouraging the brain to produce alpha waves, which are the same brain patterns seen during deep meditation. Instead of the anxious, jittery heartbeat that often comes with a heavy dose of coffee, tea delivers a state of relaxed alertness. It is a calm, sustained focus that allowed Chinese monks to sit still for hours of spiritual training, and eventually gave European strategists the mental endurance to manage global networks by altering the human brain to be both sharp and tranquil. This humble leaf became a quiet tool of immense concentration. By the middle of the 1700s, Great Britain had developed a massive, uncontrollable obsession with Chinese tea. It evolved from an exotic luxury for the wealthy into a daily necessity for the entire population, keeping factory workers fueled during the dawn of the Industrial Revolution. But this national habit created a staggering geopolitical crisis. At the time, China held an absolute, unbreakable monopoly on tea production. The Chinese emperors had no interest in European manufactured goods, and they demanded payment in only one currency, pure silver. This created a massive economic drain, as ships left London carrying mountains of silver bullion and returned with dried leaves. Fearing that this trade deficit would completely bankrupt their empire, the British looked for a desperate way to get their silver back. They found a dark, criminal solution in opium. The British East India Company began growing massive amounts of the poppy plant in India and smuggling the illegal drug into China, intentionally addicting millions of Chinese citizens. When the Chinese government took a firm stand, destroying thousands of chests of smuggled opium to save its population, Great Britain responded with military force. They sent advanced, steam-powered warships to attack Chinese ports, launching the Opium Wars. It stands as one of the most cynical conflicts in human history, where a global superpower went to war not for land or freedom, but to force open a nation's borders, just to fund its morning tea habit. Winning the war gave Britain economic access, but it didn't solve their long-term dependency on China's tea supply. To truly secure the empire's favorite drink, they needed to learn how to grow it themselves. This realization triggered the greatest act of industrial espionage the world had ever seen. In 1848, the British East India Company hired a Scottish botanist named Robert Fortune for a highly dangerous undercover mission. His instructions were simple: sneak into the interior regions of China, areas strictly forbidden to foreigners, steal the finest tea plants, and learn the closely guarded manufacturing secrets that the Chinese had kept hidden from the West for thousands of years. Fortune knew that if he was caught, he would face immediate execution. To blend in, he shaved his forehead, attached a long, braided hair queue to his head, and wore the robes of a wealthy Chinese merchant from a distant province. Traveling with local guides, he journeyed deep into the mountain tea gardens. He successfully collected over 20,000 tea plants and thousands of seeds, smuggling them out in specialized glass cases that acted as miniature greenhouses to keep the plants alive during the long, damp sea voyage. He also managed to convince several master tea makers to leave China with him. The stolen plants were brought to British-controlled India, where fortune established massive new plantations in the hills of Assam and Darjeeling. Within a few decades, India overtook China as the world's leading tea exporter. With one daring theft, Britain broke an ancient monopoly, reshaped the economy of Asia, and secured a cheap, endless supply of the liquid that fueled their empire. During the Age of Sail, exploring the globe required an immense amount of human labor. Thousands of watermen had to survive on wooden ships for months, battling freezing cold, brutal storms, and total isolation. To keep these men moving, empires needed a very specific kind of fuel. They didn't just need calories. They needed a liquid that could withstand the harshest environments on Earth without spoiling. The answer came from the waste piles of the sugar industry. When European empires carved out massive sugar plantations in the Caribbean, the refining process left behind mountains of molasses. It was a thick, black byproduct that plantation owners initially threw into the sea because they had no use for it. But they quickly discovered that if you mix this sticky sludge with water and leave it out in the tropical heat, wild yeasts will aggressively attack the remaining sugars. Through distillation, this fermented wash was transformed into a clear, incredibly high-proof spirit, rum. From a biochemical standpoint, rum was a game-changer for long-distance travel. Unlike wine or beer, which quickly turned sour and moldy in the damp belly of a ship, rum was virtually immortal. Its exceptionally high alcohol content acted as a powerful antiseptic, killing off bacteria and keeping the liquid pristine for years. Furthermore, it was an incredibly dense source of quick energy. For a cold, exhausted sailor, a single swallow of rum delivered a massive wave of calories that rushed into the bloodstream, dilating blood vessels and creating an immediate sensation of internal warmth. It was a liquid engine that kept human bodies working when they were pushed to the absolute limit. As the production of rum skyrocketed, it quickly outgrew the borders of the Caribbean and became the economic engine for a brutal global trade network. It grew so valuable that it stopped being just a drink and transformed into a literal currency. This liquid fuel became the driving force behind the infamous triangle trade. European merchants brought manufactured goods to West Africa, where they traded them for captured human beings. These enslaved people were then packed into the holds of ships and sent on a horrific voyage to the Caribbean, where they were forced to cut sugar cane under the blazing sun. The molasses produced by their labor was then shipped up north to massive distilleries in New England, where it was turned into high-quality rum. Finally, that rum was shipped back across the ocean to buy more slaves, starting the tragic cycle all over again. In the colonies of North America, rum was so central to daily life and commerce that it was used to pay bills, purchase land, and fund political campaigns. When Great Britain tried to tax the import of foreign molasses with the Molasses Act, it sparked a massive smuggling network among American merchants, planting the early seeds of resentment that would eventually lead to the American Revolution. Rum was the invisible current flowing through the Atlantic economy, shaping the wealth of nations and funding the rise of empires on the backs of millions of lives. To maintain the world's largest navy, Great Britain had to solve a difficult logistical riddle. How do you maintain strict military discipline among thousands of rough, mistreated watermen trapped on a ship for years? The water kept in wooden barrels on board quickly turned green, slimy, and full of bacteria, making it completely undrinkable. In 1655, after capturing the island of Jamaica, the Royal Navy found their solution. They officially replaced the sailors' daily ration of beer with a half pint of strong Caribbean rum. It was the ultimate tool of control. The daily rum ration was the one highlight in a sailor's brutal life. a reliable way to numb the physical pain and ease the intense psychological stress of naval warfare. But giving sailors half a pint of neat, high-proof spirit twice a day created a massive problem with public drunkenness and accidental drownings. To fix this, in 1740, an English admiral named Edward Vernon ordered that the rum must be mixed with water before being served. The sailors, noticing the admiral always wore a coat made of a rough fabric called grogram, nicknamed him Old Grog, and the water down rum took on the name grog to make the muddy water taste better. Vernon also ordered his men to add a splash of lime juice and sugar to the mix. Without realizing it, the Royal Navy had stumbled upon a brilliant medical breakthrough. The fresh lime juice provided a steady dose of vitamin C, completely protecting British sailors from scurvy, a horrific disease that routinely wiped out entire crews on long voyages, while French and Spanish sailors were collapsing from disease. British crews stayed healthy, alert, and combat-ready, fueled by their daily ration of grog. By weaponizing a discarded byproduct of the sugar trade, the British Empire secured the health of its navy, proving that the road to global dominance was paved with the clever distribution of alcohol. Most plants develop chemicals to ward off predators, but the cacao tree ended up creating a compound that perfectly targets the human pursuit of happiness. Unlike coffee and tea, which rely heavily on caffeine to shock the nervous system into alertness, cocoa's secret weapon is a unique alkaloid called theobromine. The name itself literally translates to food of the gods. From a biochemical perspective, theobromine plays a completely different game than other natural stimulants. Instead of tightening your blood vessels and forcing your heart to pump faster, it actually acts as a gentle vasodilator. It relaxes the smooth muscles in your cardiovascular system, allowing your blood vessels to widen and your blood to flow more freely. This delivers a sustained, calm wave of physical energy without the frantic jitters or the sudden crash. At the very same time, cocoa triggers the brain to release a subtle cocktail of endorphins and dopamine, alongside a rare lipid that mimics the feelings of comfort and emotional well-being. It is an incredibly sophisticated psychological hack wrapped inside a bitter seed. For ancient civilizations and royal courts alike, drinking this liquid wasn't just a matter of hydration or nutrition. It was about capturing a brief, chemically manufactured moment of pure luxury. Long before it was ever served hot, sweet, or in a porcelain cup, cocoa was the literal engine of an empire, but not in the way we usually imagine. In the ancient world of the Maya and the Aztecs, chocolate was a cold, bitter, and sharp mixture pounded together with chili peppers, cornmeal, and water. It was a sacred substance reserved strictly for high priests, royalty, and elite warriors preparing for battle, who used its unique stamina, boosting properties to march for days without food. But the truly fascinating part of this ancient economy is that cocoa beans weren't just a food source. They were the actual currency of the land. The Aztecs traded bags of these seeds, exactly the way we use paper bills today. Historical records show that you could buy a fresh tomato for 1 bean, a wild turkey for 20, and an enslaved laborer for 100. When the Spanish conquistador Hernán Cortés arrived in the Aztec capital, he witnessed the Emperor Montezuma II consuming up to 50 golden goblets of this frothy brew every single day. The Spanish quickly realized they weren't looking at a simple culinary preference. They were watching a ruler, quite literally, drink his own treasury, consuming a massive display of fluid wealth that no ordinary citizen could ever hope to afford. When the Spanish took the cocoa bean back across the Atlantic in 1528, they realized they had stumbled upon an incredible geopolitical asset. They modified the ancient Mesoamerican recipe, swapping out the fiery chilies for expensive imports like refined sugar, cinnamon, and vanilla, transforming the bitter potion into a rich, sweet delicacy. Recognizing the immense value of this new drink, the Spanish crown did something extraordinary. They turned hot chocolate into an absolute state secret. For nearly a century, the precise methods for processing the beans and blending the spices were classified under the highest levels of royal security, hidden away inside guarded monasteries and palace kitchens. Leaking the formula to rival European nations was treated as an act of treason. This tight monopoly was eventually broken, not by industrial spies, but by the politics of royal marriages. When Spanish princesses married French kings, they brought their personal chocolate makers and secret recipes with them to the Palace of Versailles as part of their priceless royal dowries. Hot chocolate quickly became the ultimate status symbol of the European elite. Drinking it required specialized silver pots and delicate porcelain cups, turning a simple morning drink into an elaborate social ritual designed to show who held power. By locking a seed behind palace gates and using it as a currency of diplomacy, European rulers proved that a liquid could draw a sharp line between the ruling class and the rest of the world.